Hello, everybody. Welcome to the DeSimone Deals Exit Strategy Podcast, hosted by me, Greg DeSimone, and Catapult Advisor Group. This podcast has been built to help business owners have more successful transitions, whether it's a transition from one generation to the next, whether it's a sale to the management team or to a third party. My goal is to educate the market so that business owners get better outcomes, whether they use me or not. I want business owners to get better outcomes in their transitions and in their exits. So all the guests I'm going to have on this podcast over time will be people who have helped and are helping companies with those types of transitions. And we're going to bring in their expertise and educate the market so business owners get better results. So without further ado, let me introduce my guest for today, Bennett from Pando Consulting. Why don't you expand on what you do and who you are, and we'll jump into it from there.
Yeah, I appreciate it, Greg. Thank you for inviting me onto your podcast. And we've had some great conversations in the past, so look forward to having this one as well. So, yeah, I was a wealth manager, financial planner for 12 years, working primarily with business owners. And what we found was that there was an extenuating need for deeper and more holistic planning when it came to exit strategy. Typically, we would talk about buy-sell agreements, we would talk about employee retention plans, and more around the personal side of what was going to happen post-sale. But what we realized is that a lot of these businesses were not ready to sell, and that typically when they wanted to enter the market, they were entering it from a point of pain and not a point of growth and profitability. And so Pando kind of came to existence because we needed to create a better process. We needed to create a better way to educate business owners around the realities of going to market and how to prepare them to have a successful sale and extract the full value out of the companies that they've built.
Excellent. So I want to dive deeper into some of the things you said, but I want to touch on something I saw in your market materials that I've quoted and posted in the past as well. You noted in one of your market materials, pieces of collateral, that 70 to 80% of companies that go to market to sell actually never do so. I think what you were just talking about touches on that. So can you explain to me why you think and why you're seeing that 70, 80% of companies that go to sell never do?
It is a staggering statistic. It is depending on the resources that you are reading. That's where you kind of get that 70 to 80% number. Exit Planning Institute puts out annual kind of surveys from business owners and talking about the experience that they've gone through, either preparation or actually going to sell, and what the results were. And so 80% is a high number. 70% is more on the lower end side. And so what we've found is it's the lack of preparation. The companies are just not prepared from a buyer's perspective, what they're looking for to get an ROI on what they're willing to pay for the company. And so what we are experiencing is that most business owners are looking at a P&L, they're looking at their profitability, but they're placing a value basically only on that one metric. And there are so many different aspects that a buyer is going to look at, especially once they go into due diligence. They're going to pull that company apart layer by layer, and they're going to find all of the inefficiencies. And so what happens is they just don't prepare their companies to be able to answer the questions a buyer is looking for, or to explain why these certain aspects have not taken place within their company over 10, 15, 20-year period. And now they're ready to sell in a distressed situation. And so it's much like a house is going on the marketplace. You have your house inspected. They come to you and say, hey, these are the areas that we think are mandatory for you to go to market. And these are the areas that we think will improve the value of your house when you go to market. It is no different than when you go to take your business to go to market as well. You need somebody to evaluate it and look at what is really keeping them from extracting the full value out of their company, but also some of the things that could enhance that value. And most companies they're going to market in the hope and prayer that it's going to sell like a buddy of theirs did down the street, or, something they read in the newspaper. And they're not looking specifically at the internal workings of their own organization.
You use the term buyer's perspective, and I use this with my clients as well. Can you give me a few examples of like what are things that buyers are looking for that the current owner kind of overlook or don't find as important or kind of ignore, and then are in for a rude awakening when they get into the negotiation process, and then even more when they get into diligence if they even get an offer?
Yeah, I think a lot of it is a buyer is looking for an investment, right? They're looking for a return on their investment, and a business owner is typically looking for profitability and income, right? And those two don't necessarily play along the same paths. And so, what you are driving profitability and maybe income on an ongoing basis in your company, a buyer is looking at, well, can I continue that same path that the existing ownership has taken? And once I purchase this, it will continue on so I can get my ROI. A
Mhm.
lot of times, this is more organizational facets that are discounting that. So I'm going to go in and I'm going to buy your company, Greg, and you are created a company that is producing great income, but it is 100% reliant on your effort to produce those sales. As a buyer, you are not staying on. You are going to, go off into your retirement or whatever next chapter of life you have. And everything that you've created for yourself is not transferable to the new ownership. And so that is a huge risk. How do we remove the owner reliance from my plate to the plate of my operations, my management, my leadership team, so that when a buyer comes in, there's continuity that this is going to continue. The other side is, the processes. A lot of times we run into owners that they have it all in their head, they've developed it, they created it, maybe they've transferred some to their employees, but a lot of it is still stuck in their head, and that's not transferable either. We need to have those systems documented out. We need to make sure they're working appropriately, they're efficient, the leadership team is utilizing them, the people on the boots on the ground are utilizing it in day-to-day operations. If that's not there, then there's no way for me as a new buyer to come in and really be able to tell if where the issue is, when one department or one aspect of the business is not working the way it did when the previous ownership was there. So, and there are countless others that we run into all the time, but owner reliance is a big one.
And now I can see why I have you on this podcast, because you say a lot of the same things I have conversations with my clients when I do an initial valuation and I give them a number and they go, that's not good enough. Why is it not more? Because my friend got X, Y, and Z, and I can point to some variations within how they look at that valuation. But in particular, I look at those things you just said. I call them the big three. Is your company growing? Do you have I call it, do you have a second layer of management? Do you have a team that you can rely on to get the work? Can you take a vacation and the business still run? And do you have the processes in place so that it's not like passing down procedures from generation to generation or from person to person through conversation? You actually have document procedures and processes where people can step up. So I call that the big three: growth, team, and process. Um, where do you see the disconnect in owners letting go of that? Because I think anyone that they ever talk to would tell them that if the business is all on you, you can't sell it, you can't go away. If you have to be there, you don't have a business, you have a job. Why do you think there's a disconnect, and how do you work with clients to break that disconnect?
It is the number one battle when you go into a business where the ownership has very tight controls on the inner workings of the company. And what I tell them is you're holding the reins so tight that you're actually choking the life out of your company. And once you just ease up a little bit on those reins, you realize you actually have more control. It is a control issue. It is something that when they started the company, they had to do all of these different aspects of running the day to day. It was out of necessity. And then as they grew and they brought in new people into that organization, only certain aspects of that were actually transferred over to that new employee. There were still some that are critical to the success of the company, or in the eyes of the owner are critical to the success of the company, that they feel like they need to make sure that they have their finger on the pulse at all times. In reality, there are best uses of that shareholder's time, and it's usually not every aspect of it. They did it out of necessity, but now they need to basically offload some of those tasks onto somebody else so that they can focus really on what their true role is, which is growth. making sure that the company is thriving and making sure it's growing and always looking at their new potential customer base that they have or a new product or service they're trying to implement, making sure that the overall 30,000 foot view is working the way it needs to. And as you go down deeper into the weeds, that the different levels of management and staffing plays that critical role all the way down to the actual work getting done. And so I think it really comes back to control. And you see that a lot in the boomer generation, more so than in some of our, Gen X generations, because they saw their parents doing the same thing. And I think that's a really important aspect of what we're talking about is you have two different mindsets. You have the older generation that the business was really their identity. They're known in the community as the business owner of so-and-so company. It is their legacy. It is their identity. They don't really have a plan outside of it. They've worked at it for 40 years. And so there's this huge fear of what comes next versus the Gen Xers who have watched their parents work into their 80s and 70s, and they don't want to do that. So they come into owning a business with the end in mind. And so they are constantly building towards that eventuality of the day that's going to come when they want to exit the company. But the company is so much more prepared. And you see it in a lot of these surveys that we're reading within our industry that this is the case. And it's a very important conversation to have with the boomers because they don't have as much on the other end of that runway as some of the Gen Xers. Like this is it. If they go to market and they don't sell, there's not a whole lot of options after that. And with 70 to 80% not selling, what happens to those companies?
It's interesting. I see the similar thing when I work with clients that are either a boomer or a Gen X. I find like the boomers' perspective is they want to leave the company or some money when they die to the next generation. Well, and maybe this isn't universal, but I'm seeing it more and more. The Gen X looks at their business as an asset. They may not know how to utilize and maximize the asset yet, but they see it as an asset, and they see it as a way to generate wealth and cash to spend with their family while they're alive and while the family can use it when they're younger. So with that in mind, with the thinking how the Gen X are starting to change that perspective, and there's still some mistakes where they're not selling. There's 70-80% aren't selling. How far in advance, ideally, would it be that you want a business owner, other than they start from day one thinking this way, but they've got the business, they get through the normal growth hurdles, they get through a couple different business cycles and say, okay, I've got a business, it works, I've been able to adapt, but what do they have to do now? Say, okay, I want to start preparing for sale. How far out before the sale or transition do they need to start working on this stuff to make it really have a positive impact?
Ideally, we would want 18 months at a minimum to really get an organization ready to go to market. If we had 36 months, that would be a much better situation. And it's all about, the three things that we tell business owners when we're talking about this is, first we assess the company and trying to figure out and pinpointing what actually is taking place internally. And then we put together a game plan on what we need to fix. If a company has never put capital back into their business for growth, for strategy, for, building value, or just really de-risking as a whole, then that stuff needs to be done. And that takes time to implement, and it takes capital to implement it. And so we always have the conversation. It's how motivated are you to sell, and how bad is your situation, and what are you willing to do to change it? There's going to be pain on the front end, pain in the middle, or pain all the way through. Which one do you want? And the idea is that we take on a little pain on the front end so that the results are much better on the back end. But if you don't do anything, then you're going to be a statistic, or you're going to be discounted so much that it doesn't even make sense for you to accept the offer. And so really we say 18 months, we can do a lot of work. Part of that is to build out what due diligence is going to look at. We've kind of coined the phrase pre-diligence. That is for us to be able to go in, understand what is going to take place in the due diligence process, which I know you're very familiar with, but making sure that that data room is ready to go so that when a buyer comes to them with an LOI and they accept that LOI and then they go into diligence, that everything is pretty much ready to go at that point. There may be some one-off questions here or there, but they're more clarifying than why is this happening? And if we can prepare that client for that, one, it makes your job a lot easier, but the outcome is so much better for everybody involved. It is a very taxing process. It is an emotional roller coaster that these business owners are taken through. And we forget that they also have to run a business every day while going through the due diligence. And most of their staff and leadership team have no idea that they're even doing this. So they got to do it behind closed doors and they have no support. So it is a daunting task. And we just want to really make sure that our role is to help guide that process to the best of our abilities. But it does require change. It does require capital, and it does require time.
Right, you said a lot there, and there's a lot of things I want to kind of dig into it. A couple of things you said, one of the things you said there that I really liked and was music to my ears was the diligence and the pre-diligence. And I have these conversations with business owners all the time, as we put the book together to market the business, is that I want to build the data room. I want all the information ready, not because I'm going to present it all to the buyers, but because, as you talked about earlier, the buyers have a different perspective on what they want, what transition or a transferable business looks like. And I want my clients, when I talk to them, say, here's what we're going to present. Here's the next question they're going to ask. Here's the follow-up question. Here's the things they're going to be concerned with. And I don't want to be able to just say what the answer is. I want to be able to show them the answer. Or if I do use words to explain, or I do a quick graph to explain what's going on, I still know they're going to want to see all the detail. And I want the confidence that the graph I give, or the sentence or the explanation I give, can be backed by data that's already ready to be presented to them. It just makes a huge difference. It creates surprise. It creates less surprises during the process. And I know, you've probably heard this from business owners. They say, well, these companies are just going to give you a bid and then they're going to go to diligence so they can cut the price. Yes, that may be a strategy, but one way to combat that strategy is what you're talking about, is if you do the pre-diligence and your information that you present to market the business is based on that diligence that you know is good and ready to go, there's a much smaller chance, and almost a zero chance, that they're going to be able to adjust the purchase price because they find new information. The only reason they'll be able to change the price is because the dynamics of the business change. There was a downturn, a supplier left, or a customer left. But it's not because you weren't prepared. It's something that happened after the fact. So I love what you said there, because that's a big fight I have with clients getting ready for that.
It's a shift of leverage when you go to the table to negotiate. All of a sudden, the buyers are thinking, "Oh, we got this," because they usually do. But then they encounter a company that's ready to go and well prepared, and they're like, "Oh, well, we don't really have anything to come back and counter our original LOI off of. What are you going to discount? Everything's right there. Everything's documented. Everything is, the owner reliance is shifted off to the leadership team. The SOPs are well documented. All the financials are reconciled. Everything is that a buyer's looking for is there. Now, they may not end up buying the company for other reasons, but it's not because of due diligence.
Yes, and I love the way you said that, because that's exactly what it is. When they come back with questions, I'm like, no, we talked about this and here's the support for that. No, we talked about that as well, and here's the support for that. So I do love that. The other one thing you mentioned earlier was talking about de-risking the business and the need for spending capital to do that. Can you talk about how you connect spending money on capital and de-risking the business?
So we have a client currently. They had explosive growth. They are a newer company. They had no de-risking processes in place. They're critical members on the team that were really driving this growth. They were older, and there was no kind of retention plan for them to stick around once the sale took place. There was no really key person funding that, if God forbid they didn't come into work the next day, that there was continuity, at least from a capital standpoint, that we run fire drills to say, hey, if this individual does not come in tomorrow for whatever reason, what needs to happen and who are the people that are going to actually take over those tasks. So really looking at that, obviously the ownership is key, and looking at what the risk is associated with them. We have run into so many crazy one-off scenarios where the ownership has either become disabled or passed suddenly. and the organization is just rocked and they don't know what to do. And these are not small companies. These are, 40, $50 million companies, and they were making money. They were printing money. They never really looked at the associated risk to that based on the employees. And so that's one aspect of it. The other side of it is, what happens if we lose a client? What kind of client concentration do we have? Do we have that kind of 80-20, situation where 80% of our revenue is coming from 20% of our clientele, and we lose one? We had a situation in our hometown where it was a marketing agency and they only had one company, which was a Fortune 100 company, doing all their marketing. Well, guess what? We had a new VP of sales marketing come into that company, and they changed it. This was a 40-year relationship, and they had nothing to kind of support that. And we can play Monday quarterback and say, well, that was the dumbest thing ever. How did they not see that? But it was a trusted relationship for 40 years, and it was great. And something changed internally, and that company is no longer in existence. So there's all kinds of risk out there. There's all kinds of property and casualty, insurance companies that evaluate risk internally with the company, but they don't look at the inner workings of what's going on to make sure that that golden goose turns out a golden egg every single day, every single month, every single year.
That example you just gave about that change in the VP of marketing, I think that's one that gets overlooked a lot by businesses. You talk to a business owner and say, we have a great relationship. They're not going anywhere. I was dealing with a client that had a long-term relationship with a bank, a larger bank, and multiple decision makers in the bank. And they said, we're embedded with them, that we're not going anywhere. And I said, what if they get acquired by someone? They're the perfect size to get acquired. Will you still have all this work? Are you sure that the new CIO or the new chief technology officer is going to want to hire you? They felt it would be. My feeling was, you don't know if it happens because someone wants to put their fingerprint on it. There's things that are way beyond your control. No matter how good you manage relationships, outside forces can change. And I think that's a good lesson for a lot of people. I think that's why I think what you're talking about, de-risking the business, is identifying those hidden risks that sellers take for granted and say, here are some things that you take for granted, but a buyer is going to ask about this question. Every time you give a bad answer or don't have a solution or a process or a person that can help with that, your valuation, your multiple keeps going down to the point where they might say, this is way too risky. Doesn't matter what, there's nothing we can pay that will make this worthwhile for us. So I think that's a great point that you're making there. And I imagine talking to you in our past conversations and going through some of your materials, one of the things that you probably do to help with that process, I believe, is the quality of earnings review and process that you do. Can you kind of
Yes.
go through, because you're not a true like CPA firm where a lot of those that comes to get hired to do quality of earnings. There's a lot of at buy side, they always do it. More and more companies are doing the sell side. But when you and I talked about it, it's a similar process, but it's different because you have a different perspective than a pure CPA firm. Tell me how you guys do it and the benefits of that.
Yeah, so everything that Pando does is around preparation for selling, everything. So when we come in and we say we're doing a quality of earnings assessment, what we're doing is we're going through every financial document, all the tax returns, looking at adjustments and add backs, looking at discounted cash flow, looking at your balance sheet and your assets and your liabilities. We're really breaking down the company from a financial standpoint, all the way down to what is your break-even ratio? How much attrition, if I'm a buyer coming to buy you, how much attrition can I take on before we hit that kind of break-even point that, no, we don't want to test it, but we know it's there. And that's really important. And a business owner has never looked at their company that way, but a buyer is going to. And so what we're doing is, yes, we're calling it a quality of earnings, but essentially what we're doing is walking them through that process that the buyer is going to take them through, so that we can identify some of these risks and then have time to be able to make changes around that. A lot of times we come in and the financials, they're not sufficient. They don't have a good CPA firm or accountant that's actually coming in and reconciling these things. They don't have a good control on their payables or their receivables. And so we're coming in, we're asking these questions ahead of time. And if it's something that they cannot answer, we're going to shift them to either their CPA or a new CPA. just so that we can start getting clean financials and making sure that when we actually go to market, that's the last thing that they are questioning, is that their financials are not up to speed. Then we go in and look at what is the company really of value, right? And what are those areas that are discounting that value? So we basically benchmark them against industry standards using our IBIS World data and saying, okay, let's see, you're telling me you're growing at 15% and you're thrilled about that, but ultimately your industry is growing at 22% year over year. You're 7% behind. What do we need to do to be able to track towards that? A lot of companies are not measuring KPIs. They don't even know what the industry benchmarks are. And so when we say quality of earnings, we're walking them all the way through that process. Basically, what we're trying to do is show them where they are currently today, based on opinion of value, based on all the financial metrics that we've looked at, looking at some of the economic, market, and industry risk associated, and then applying a value to that. But also showing them a game plan of, hey, if we fix these critical areas of your business, we can actually increase your multiple by X. And so we're not only telling them, hey, this is where you are today, but we're also building out a roadmap to help them get to a number that is more realistic of what they should be seeing in the marketplace.
So you mentioned something about CPAs. This is always a touchy subject because CPAs are great referral sources for me. But I also know that there are some great CPAs out there that do great work. There are some other ones that I question their abilities. Not many, but there are some. But where I think I see the biggest area of issue is a mismatch of the CPA's skill set and strength for where the business owner is and where the business is, particularly as it relates to a transaction. How do you have these conversations with clients saying your CPA is not a bad person, they're pretty smart in X, Y, and Z, but they don't have these aspects and you need them if you move forward? How do you have those types of conversations when sometimes the best and biggest trusted relationship a business owner will have is with their CPA?
I think it's a matter of letting the data speak for itself. If we're walking into a company and their financials are not in proper order and they are not getting advice outside of, December saying, hey, you're going to have a profit and you need to go buy a new piece of equipment to discount that, we find that is all they really need to hear. And that as long as we have a solution for them and helping them find CPA firm that is going to help guide them towards that eventuality of a sale, they're more receptive to it. Most CPAs that we run into are tax preparers, and they do a really good job at preparing taxes. The problem is when you're trying to build value in a company, the metrics of tax savings and value enhancement are not the same. And a perfect example is this. If we are looking at you saying, hey, you're going to have a profit of $1 million this year, and you're going to pay taxes on that, you need to go buy a new truck or you need to go buy a new piece of equipment to discount that. You're saving 25% of every dollar that you spend on that piece of equipment in tax savings. The problem is you lose 3, 4, 5, 6x in multiple for every dollar that you don't show in profitability. And so it's a different mindset. And I understand the CPA and most business owners don't want to pay taxes, and nobody does. But taxes are a byproduct of profitability. And if you are profitable, then that enhances your multiple that you're looking at when you go to market. That's what a buyer is buying, your profitability, your ability to continue that profitability after purchase. So if all you're doing is showing these purchases that are discounting your tax obligation and not enhancing your valuation, I think it's a disservice. And that's the conversation we want to be able to have with a CPA and help guide them to make those decisions, understanding the impact of what they're ultimately recommending.
I think going back to what you said earlier, I think that comes down to those conversations about spending capital to de-risk the business. Is your capital actually enhancing the value of the business? Is it creating a platform for future growth? Or is it really just a paper exercise to cut taxes? And I think that is a big point that you didn't say directly, but I think it's a direct correlation to the two. You also do something that I'll say I've never heard before. Maybe people do it, but I don't know what I've never seen it phrased this way. You do quality of operations.
Yes.
Explain what that means and how that fits into this transaction.
Absolutely. I mean, it's the infrastructure, it's the rebarb of your business, right? It is what is going to make sure that all the growth that you're trying to build within your company is supported by that rebarb. And what I say is when a buyer is coming in, what we are doing is we are looking at 47 different facets within your organization around money, people, implementation, and strategy. We score you on those 47 different facets on a score of 1 to 5. And what that's doing is it's telling us how implemented these specific facets are within your organization. 1, they don't exist. 5, you're running them through every level of your organization and they're well documented. What we want to be able to do is take that, because there is a discount on everything that is not really up to par when a buyer comes in through the diligence, to say, well, you don't have documented SOPs, you don't have your inventory systems in place, you're not necessarily creating strategic implementations, you're looking at it more from a tactical day by day standpoint, you're putting out a lot of fires. So what that does is it allows us to score the organization on a very formatted basis. And then what we can do is go in and actually start working on some of the things that are a priority to fix. There may be something that is a bigger value return by fixing it, but we got to do other things first before that actually is going to be implemented at the full extent. And a perfect example is we need to hire, we have a lot of turnover, right, within our organization. It's a revolving door. We hire them and in 90 days they're gone. Well, that's a culture issue, most likely, or it's a hiring practice issue. And so what we do is we are scoring them. And if we see that culture is not a huge part of the business, and you're trying to hire these people where they're looking for a strong culture, then yeah, they're going to get unhappy and they're going to leave. And so that's the source of the problem. So we need to fix that first before we actually go and fix the hiring practices. Doesn't mean we don't come back to that. It just means let's fix the root problem first so that we have a strong foundation to build off of.
You said something there that really wanted to reiterate. It's a soft concept, but it has a big value impact. It's culture and how you build your teams and how you manage your teams and you grow your teams. Um, in my past life, I used to work in corporate and I was part of 15 transactions, 12 of which we were the buy side. And the ones that failed were always due to culture. There was a mismatch in culture and we didn't do a great job upfront matching it. Because I'll tell you, on paper, we never signed off on a transaction on paper that didn't make sense financially. And you do a post-mortem, like, why didn't this work? And that invisible risk that you see there is the culture wasn't right and the culture wasn't matched to the new organization. So I think that's a big area where companies kind of miss the boat or don't miss the boat. They're not aware of how big of an impact that's going to have for a valuing transaction. And quite honestly, I would be, you probably would reiterate this too, is if you work on a better culture and build a better culture, it probably means the business is going to be easier to run and easier to manage as you own it, which means it's going to be more profitable and less stressful. So I think that's a big point, that cultures gets totally overlooked in these processes.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many layers to the culture side. One is that the older generation, the boomers, it wasn't culture. You hired somebody, they worked their way up into the company, they got their gold Rolex, and they retired off. You worked a 40, 50-hour week and you just didn't complain about it. It just was what it was. The newer generation of employees, that's what they care about. Yeah, you can pay them $1 more an hour, but guess what? Somebody else with a better culture is going to pay them $1 more an hour. And that lack of culture in your establishment is really going to be the point of where they decide to leave, not the dollar more per hour. And so I think you have to look at it from that standpoint, but you also have to look at, well, what's going to happen once we take over this company and potentially merge them into an existing company? If we don't understand how the cultures are going to work together or really deflect off of each other, we're going to have a really hard time. And to your point, it's the success of that that really allows for explosive growth post merger versus a situation where, yeah, the financials made sense. Yeah, we're gonna, as long as everything is going the way it is, we're gonna make a great ROI on this. But you're not looking at the most important aspects of the people who have to actually make this happen. And if they're not happy and they're not in a thriving culture, they're gonna go. It's just that's what they're looking for. And it may not be important to the older generation. It is absolutely important to the younger ones.
Cool. So you've talked about a lot of stuff, and like it's like music to my ears. Like all the stuff I talk about once we sign up to go to market, you're talking about getting them ready for market, which I think is awesome. It's basically doing what I want done ahead of time, which makes a perfect client, makes it much more easy to sell and to sell for more money. Um, is there any specific examples or a project that you're particularly proud of, where like you guys went in there and you went through your QOV, went through your quality of earnings, quality of operations, you did your analysis, helped with implementation, that you could see a big tangible increase that you're really proud of?
Yeah, I mean, the one that I think really speaks to a lot of what our work can do is when a company is got the profitability and they come to us with, we want to sell, but we're not sure we're ready to sell. And to me, that creates that baseline of, okay, I can build on this. When you have somebody who is receptive to change and receptive to uh, constructive criticism within an organization that they've built only to better their situation, that is the ideal scenario for us to walk into. Unfortunately, that's not always the case, but in this particular situation, it was. And what we were able to do is what we found is on the quality of earnings side, they were doing really well. They were doing exceptionally well. Where they were failing was on the operations side. It was a newer company. They were growing exponentially. They had a lot of friends and family as part of the organization. They had a great culture. They were having a great time. Everything was working for them. But after we did our quality of operations assessment, they didn't have any of that infrastructure. They had none of the rebarb to really support the growth that they were experiencing. And so what we came back with was, look, the trajectory that you're on is fantastic, but you need to take some of that capital and reinvest it into your organization. Yes, you got friends and family that were here to help you through this crazy, growth strategy or growth transition that you had, but they're not going to get you to that next level. And so now we need to really start looking at the organization as a whole and understanding what are the areas that we need to bring in more professionals around, people that have a higher skill set to get you to that next level. What systems do we need to bring in to help support that documentation, the SOPs, analytics, all these different aspects that you need in a business, because they wanted to sell pretty quickly. And so what we were able to do is quickly identify these are the areas that we are recommending that you go talk to them. Now, we did not do a lot of the heavy lifting. What we are really good at is understanding where you were and where you're trying to get to, and then helping manage that project so that there's continuity along the way. So once we implement this project, we oversee it. And then once we're done with that project, we come back to the shareholders and say, okay, we fixed this. Let's look at the list of things that we're going to work on. And then we go to the next step. And what that really did was allowed them to decide that they were actually having a really good time. Things were good. They were running a lot smoother. The owners weren't necessarily being brought into a lot of the tactical decisions. And so they actually pushed out their timeline a couple years. And so now we're just kind of managing the situation where they're more profitable. They are growing an organization that is incredibly sustainable. And a buyer, we are kind of looking at who their specific type of buyer is. And we are basically implementing strategies that a buyer like them would want to see in a company of this size. And so that's what we're doing right now. So it's up to them on when they want to go to market, but they are currently ready to go to market whenever they choose.
I love that. When I've talked to clients in the past, I talk about creating a transferable business, which means it's ready to go at any time, whether you get sick, whether someone knocks on your door, whether you just said, you know what, I have another opportunity, or I'm looking forward to spending more time with my grandkids. I got my first grandchild and I want to spend time with them. No matter what reason you have, if your business is transferable, you've built it to be transferred, you are calling the shots and doing it on your own terms versus getting what you get and not getting upset. Usually though, it's not that case. It's they get what they get and they get very upset because they didn't realize the value they thought they were going to get.
Right.
Thank you very much for the time today. This is great. You said a lot of good things. I think a lot of people would probably want to follow up with you and learn more about some of the stuff you're implementing with your clients. If they want to get a hold of you, if any of the people watching this podcast want to get a hold of you, what's the best way to get a hold of you?
So you can go onto our website, Pando, Pando consultinggroup.com. And we have many ways for you to reach out to us to get additional information. We have white papers and blog posts and just a basic overview of our company and what our purpose is, which is really similar to yours, to drive education around how to properly sell your company.
Great. Well, thank you for being a guest on our podcast. This is really great. I love how you're aligned with how I think, which I guess that doesn't mean means you're aligned with me. Hopefully, people see that the fact that there's starting to become alignment in the marketplace on how to prepare for sale will start to register. But thank you so much for your time, and I look forward to having you on again. And I look forward to collaborating with you on some future projects because I know that you hand off a client to me, it's going to be in much better shape to bring it to market.
Absolutely. Thanks, Greg. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much.